If Iran's control cracks, the shock won't stop at its borders. Iran's rulers promised stability, faith, and independence, but none of that comes free. The Iran Revolution was sold as liberation from corruption and foreign control. What followed was a system that traded political freedom for ideological certainty. Today, that trade is unraveling, and the cost shows up in oil prices, inflation, and global security. Whether people notice it or not, this story already touches their wallets. Most explanations flatten Iran into slogans: theocracy, rogue state, sanctions victim. But Iran regime explained properly looks more like stress fractures in concrete, slow, invisible, then sudden. The Ayatollahs didn't seize power by accident. They built a system designed to survive anger. For decades, it worked through fear, ideology, and external enemies. Now those tools are wearing thin, and the cracks are spreading. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the Ayatollahs rose, how the Iran supreme leader locked power in place, and why Iran protests today feel different. You'll see why women became the front line of resistance, and why this moment matters far beyond Iran's borders. Because when legitimacy collapses, outcomes rarely stay local. Stay until the end. The final question might flip how you see Middle East geopolitics entirely. Chapter 1. Iran before the Ayatollahs, a country pulled between modernity and control. Most people assume Iran was always run by clerics, but here's the twist. Before the Ayatollahs, Iran looked more like a fast-growing emerging market than a theocracy. Under the Shah, cities expanded, oil money flowed, and Western lifestyles spread fast. Skylines rose, universities grew, and Tehran felt closer to Europe than the Middle East. So why did a country racing toward modernity suddenly slam the brakes? Because speed without consent feels less like progress and more like being dragged. Iran under Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was modernizing at warp speed, fueled by oil and Cold War alliances. But political power stayed locked tight, enforced by the secret police, Savak, crushing dissent quietly and efficiently. Imagine getting a pay raise while losing your right to speak. That tension doesn't disappear, it compounds. Urban elites benefited, rural and religious communities felt erased, and resentment spread beneath the surface. That pressure didn't just shape Iran politics, explained. It shaped future oil prices, regional stability, and Middle East geopolitics. Think of it like upgrading your phone's software without asking. Faster, flashier, but suddenly nothing feels like yours. Modernization without legitimacy turns growth into a threat, not a gift. That's why the Iran Revolution wasn't about poverty, it was about trust collapsing. When people stop believing power represents them, they look elsewhere for authority. And once that door opens, someone else is already waiting to walk through it. Chapter 2. The 1979 Revolution, How the Clergy Outplayed Everyone. Here's the part most people miss. The Iran Revolution didn't start as an Islamic takeover at all. It began as a mass revolt with liberals, Marxists, students, workers, and clerics all shouting the same thing: the Shah must go. Think of it like a group project where everyone agrees on the problem, but never on who should lead. In the chaos, the loudest voice isn't always the strongest, it's the most organized, and the Ayatollahs understood that before anyone else did. While secular groups argued theory, the clergy controlled mosques, sermons, and nationwide trust networks. From exile, Khomeini became a symbol. Simple slogans, cassette tapes, and religious language people already understood. The mosques worked like a pre-digital social media system, spreading messages faster than the state could stop them.
Liberals thought religion would step aside after victory. Instead, it stepped forward and locked the door. That miscalculation reshaped the Iran Supreme Republic and still affects sanctions, oil markets, and regional security today. Picture quitting a job with friends to start a company, only to realize one partner owns the building, the keys, and the bank account. Once the Shah fell, the Ayatollahs moved fast, referendums, purges, and power grabs before rivals could react. The Iran Revolution 1979 didn't flip overnight. It narrowed, hardened, and became irreversible. That's how a broad uprising turned into clerical rule, almost unnoticed. But what happens when a system built on momentum needs consent instead of fear? Chapter 3: The System That Locked Power Forever, Supreme Leader and Guardians. Iran has elections, debates, and politicians, but here's the catch: none of them hold the final keys. Real power sits above the ballot box, in a role most countries don't have, the Iran Supreme Leader. It's a setup that looks familiar on the surface, then quietly breaks the rules underneath. Think of it like playing a game where you can vote on the moves, but not on who owns the board. Once that clicks, Iran regime explained suddenly makes a lot more sense. After the revolution, the Islamic Republic Iran was built around Vilayat-e-Faqih, ruled by a senior cleric. The supreme leader controls the military, judiciary, state media, and veto power through the Guardian Council. Elected presidents can talk economics, but can't touch core power structures. That's why reforms stall, sanctions persist, and markets stay nervous. Nothing structural ever truly changes. For energy prices, regional security, and Middle East geopolitics, this frozen system matters far beyond Iran. Think of it like being allowed to redecorate a house, but never touch the foundation. Elections exist to release pressure, not to transfer power. That design makes collapse unlikely, but peaceful change even harder. That's why protest cycles repeat without resolution, and why frustration keeps building. And when pressure has nowhere to go, it doesn't disappear. It finds a crack. Chapter 4: From Revolution to Regional Power, Survival Through Confrontation. Most governments fear enemies. Iran's regime learned to need them. War, sanctions, and isolation didn't weaken the Ayatollahs the way outsiders expected. They became the glue that held the system together. Think of a company that stays alive not by selling products, but by convincing employees they're under constant attack. Fear, when managed, becomes loyalty. The Iran-Iraq War turned survival into a sacred narrative, hardening society and empowering the Revolutionary Guards. Sanctions pushed the economy inward, rewarding those who controlled smuggling, construction, and security. Iran expanded influence through Hezbollah, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, not for ideology alone, but leverage. Every clash with the U.S. or Israel justifies tighter control at home. That strategy shapes oil prices, shipping risks, and energy security across Middle East geopolitics. It's like a government running on permanent emergency mode. No off switch, no accountability. External pressure unites elites and silences internal rivals. That's why confrontation isn't a mistake, it's policy. But reliance on enemies creates a dangerous dependency. What happens when fear stops working on the people it's meant to control?
Chapter 5: The Breaking Point, Economy, Youth, and the Collapse of Fear. For decades, fear kept the system standing, but fear has an expiration date. Iran today isn't rising up because of ideology, it's rising up because daily life stopped making sense. Rent climbs, jobs disappear, savings evaporate, and promises sound hollow. This isn't a rebellion led by generals, it's led by exhausted people. And once fear stops paying the bills, it stops working. Sanctions, corruption, and mismanagement hollowed out the economy, while a young population came online. Over 60% of Iranians are under 35, educated, connected, and painfully aware of what they're missing. Women, students, and workers became the engine of Iran protests today, especially Iran women protests. Despite censorship, videos spread faster than arrests, turning local anger into national momentum. That instability ripples outward. Energy markets react, currencies wobble, and regional investors pull back. Think of it like staying in a job you hate until your savings run out. Suddenly, risk feels unavoidable. This generation didn't live through the 1979 trauma that once justified obedience. They measure legitimacy by opportunity, not slogans. That's why these protests feel different and more dangerous to the system. But when belief collapses before power does, something unpredictable fills the gap. Chapter 6: Today's Protests and Iran's Uncertain Future. What's happening in Iran today isn't a protest wave, it's a pressure leak that won't seal. There's no single leader to arrest, no headquarters to raid, no speech to silence. Protests erupt in schools, factories, neighborhoods, and funerals, then disappear only to resurface elsewhere. That unpredictability terrifies the Ayatollahs more than massive crowds ever did, because systems built on control don't know how to fight chaos. Today's unrest is driven by women, youth, and workers whose lives intersect daily with state control. Iran women protests turned compulsory hijab enforcement into a flashpoint for broader economic and social rage. Videos spread despite shutdowns, making repression visible and irreversible. Unlike 2009 or 2019, protesters aren't asking for reform, they're rejecting legitimacy itself. That instability feeds straight into energy prices, sanctions risk, and Middle East geopolitics calculations worldwide. Think of it like termites inside a house. The structure looks fine until it suddenly isn't. The regime still controls weapons, prisons, and courts, but belief is gone, especially among the young. Even loyalty inside security forces becomes transactional, not ideological. This isn't a countdown to revolution, it's a slow grind that exhausts power. And systems usually collapse not when challenged loudly, but when obedience quietly disappears. This story isn't about ancient history or distant ideology, it's unfolding in real time. Understanding how the Ayatollahs built power explains why Iran protests today keep returning, even after brutal crackdowns. It helps make sense of why energy prices jump, why sanctions linger, and why Middle East geopolitics stay volatile. For anyone following markets, security, or global politics, Iran isn't background noise, it's a pressure point. And pressure points don't stay quiet forever. Outcomes aren't locked in even inside rigid systems like the Islamic Republic Iran. History shows regimes don't fall only to force, they erode when the leaf disappears. Following Iran politics explained through structure, not headlines, sharpens how you read global risk everywhere. That mindset applies far beyond Iran, to markets, careers, and political cycles closer to home. Understanding power is how you stop being surprised by it. Do you think these protests will lead to reform or just harsher repression? Can a system survive once fear stops working, even if it still controls force? And what happens if succession inside Iran turns instability inward? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep learning how geopolitics, economics, and power shape your everyday life.